Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are yet once again listening to Architecture Talk. I hope you are enjoying the conversations we have on this podcast. And if you do and if you don't, it would be wonderful to hear back from you. Also excited to note that we will actually be releasing a brand new website very soon. So watch out for that announcement. So today I'm having a conversation with my good old friend Sergio Palleroni, who is the director of the Center for Public Interest Design at Portland State University. I first met Sergio about 25 years ago when he was also a faculty here at the University of Washington. And through the decades, I have, with astonishment, followed the amazing diversity and sheer beauty of the work that Sergio has done around the world working with disadvantaged communities. His pedagogy is unique, and his manner of talking and ways of thinking about what the purposes of architecture are very convincing. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here we go. So, welcome to Architecture Talk, Sergio. Good. So, today is 10th of March, and today is my father's birthday. And you met him, right? And he was very fond of you, and he was very proud of the work that you are doing. So we have known each other for, I think, what is it, like 25 years or so. And you started this public interest work long ago. You had a series of fantastic design build studios out of Seattle here in Mexico, in Cuernavaca. Yes. It's between Tepoztlán and Cuernavaca, which I visited and had a great time with, and I was very impressed. And now at Portland, you have been running for almost a decade, I'd say, the Center for Public Interest Design. And you travel around the world. I'm looking at your website at the list of your projects. There are projects in Tibet, there are projects in Buenos Aires, there are projects in Sacramento, bunch of them, of course, around you in Portland. You have worked in Eastern Washington, I remember. You have worked, everywhere in the world, and everywhere, from what I can tell, you work with disadvantaged communities. You use the activity of working with those communities, with the students, and in other forums to produce a culture of service learning, and in the process also make a transformative impact. So you saw a sort of a activist approach into
Yes, I was
architecture
stuck.
as a kind of a methodology to try and heal, is your word, your sense of displacement and your sense of inequity in the world.
Yes, yes.
And the thing that strikes me with that trajectory, that narrative of your life, is that while of course the sort of very active notion of displacement that you suffered, and many more people suffer in more fundamental ways, that both architecture as a discipline has for a long time has had this history of activism, and the sense that it must be for the marginalized communities.
Mhm.
And academia in general, even though it's significantly marginalized in the United States, also has the sense of having a activist sense to it. I mean, and in both those cases, both architecture as an activist discipline and academics also feel like marginalized disciplines, marginalized areas to be in the world. I mean, they also feel like, uh, if you want, southern disciplines and professions. Um,
God. Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
like a triple whammy, yeah?
yeah. But
I guess I never, having seen it the way that the Catalans and the Spaniards, not just Catalans, but everywhere in Spain, there were just similar discussions, with the fall of Franco
Right.
and the fascists, was they weren't seeing it for, what they had suffered, but they'd seen it for where they were going to go,
The future.
and the future. So I think there's two ways to move forward. One is to look inwardly and heal the wounds, and there's another one which is just you move forward, and in a way you forget certain things, you decide that certain things you're done with, and you need to move forward. And I guess maybe we all do a little bit of both.
Right.
And I think that I think that the interesting thing about the discussion and debate and everything was partially was about what needed to be built, how would the city come together again, how would the cultures of Spain come together. But I think more fundamentally, it was their role. It was the idea that these discussions you would have with each other could be the basis of form making. You know what I'm saying? I felt like, when you get taught architecture and things like that, you're never quite aware of the discussion that was held in the room behind that led to this change, right? And it led to the creation of this. And yet,
Yeah.
architecture has been so, has really repressed that discussion or not made people aware of it. I mean, what we get is this end product. We don't get the idea of the richness of the discussion. I just became enamored by the discourse and what it activated and how it connected. I mean, there were, I remember this one day discussion. On Sundays they would have they'd have in front of the cathedral in Barcelona. I lived in the Gothic quarter right across the street, and in the cathedral in front they would dance this the sardana, which is this ancient dance, kind of clunky, but anyway. But the Catalans love it, and you love it because they love it. And then we'd all sit around and talk about these things and the different voices, and they were all architects or intellectuals. Everybody had an opinion. Grandparents who had been to the Civil War 40 years earlier. And I felt like, my God, I love the diversity of that discussion. And I felt like architecture had robbed itself of part of its past by not including those voices, in the final product. I'm not making us aware of how we got there, And so when I went into architecture school, and I think definitely after, I just became so conscious that those voices needed to be included or recorded or be made celebrated, as central to the act of architecture,
And the opposite of the sort of more traditional identity of architecture, which is based on,
Right.
in the old days, masters, and today star architects. I mean, it seems like architecture is celebrated for its ability to conjure up masterworks rather than for its sort of deeply embedded role in community building, but which of course is a core value around here. But before we go down too deep into that, I'm looking at all your projects on your website. Now talk to me a little bit. I'm very interested. You work around the world and you work in deeply embedded communities. Talk to me about the
Right.
the aesthetics of your work. Modernism seems to have a deep impact everywhere in all architectural thinking and building. How would you describe the varied ways, or sort of what unifies and what produces variety? How do you produce? I mean, I know it's all community based,
Right.
but nevertheless, what is your sense of the overall aesthetic of your work, or its visual character?
It's funny you mentioned it. So when I wrote my first kind of comprehensive book around my work at University of Washington, and you were so
Yes.
helpful.
Yeah.
Then some people said, well, I think the question came up, and the idea that I didn't have an aesthetics to our work, that the work seemed to be taking different forms depending on the projects. And So like American Indian housing would look like more like a traditional home, and and it would emphasize the idea of home. And the schools in Mexico, I think, were much more modernist. Much more. In
Right.
my deepest of hearts, I'm a die-hard modernist. And a core lover and all that kind of stuff. But I think in the end, I think we were driven by the idea of the theory of place. Maybe I later heard Alvaro Siza articulate so well that every place has its own theory. So he goes to a place and understand the logic of the place and the values, and you construct a philosophy. Try to understand what's the central driving values and processes of an area and assets of a place, and you construct the work from
Right.
those values, assets, and voices. And so sometimes you end up with something. If you've listened well, the architect then becomes a curator of this process in a way. And you don't. It's not that you're a
Right.
silent voice, because you bring in your aesthetic understanding, your understanding of the process, or how a building comes together, it's built, or a material gets dealt with. But you're also kind of cognizant that every form and things has value that you may not recognize, but it's significant and central to the culture you're working in. And I always tell the students, that this is a conversation, and they're, in a way, we don't want to be anthropologists and stand away. We want to be committed to that conversation, and you don't want to lose your voice, but at the same time, you want to understand what is being told to you of what is of value of this country. And architects tend to, in this search for this vision, we sometimes tend to, kind of round and mold these voices into a kind of thing that fits into our own trajectory rather than the trajectory of the communities that we serve. So I think, so our little tiny houses that my colleague and I, Todd Ferry and I, have been working on, those look like little homes. Some of them look pretty sexy, like would fit an architecture journal, and others look more home-like. And the American Indian housing definitely looks like homes, and the schools look more modern, and they vary along the way. But I think I've gone back to these properties like 20. The first ones we did were 32 years ago, and they're all deeply loved by the communities, and they've been added to and respected, and so there's something was working, and when it wasn't, they made changes. So I always had the students go back and look at the projects of previous students to understand that, nothing's untouchable. The community is going to come back and make adaptations.
What have been some of the surprising adaptations and changes you have found over the years?
That it's interesting.
Just surprising. What have you learned from that?
I think some of the adaptations, I feel like I've been part of the trajectory and the evolution and the growing up of the project. A project is like a human being. And when you finish the process of co-creating it with a community, it's a teenager, and then it grows up, and and so sometimes you still remain as a co-parenting, and you and the community invites you back to build new things. Like we did a series of solar kitchens. The solar kitchens became community kitchens that had deep green environmental values that now we see as off the grid and stuff like that. But we were invited by the communities who had built those kitchens to come back and embed them in the schools that we had built earlier, because they deeply loved the schools. And now they realized that they had the school was so significant to them that they thought, why did we close the doors on it at 3:00? This is our community. This is our community. This is the most loved product. It should be a community center. So we had to hybridize the original idea and introduce a kitchen that kept it open, that kept the doors open 24/7, right? So sometimes we had that kind of opportunity, and sometimes we've done things like I'm working now back to a client. We had Dave Riley, who is a professor at UW with me, started the American Indian Housing Initiative in Montana. And this woman, we built a traditional, beautiful little house for a mother who had been basically homeless, but taken care of other people despite her being houseless. And she saw this as a point of activation, transformed her life. She was able to do so much more for others. And now she has like 100 structures that are on this site. And I look at this site and I think, oh my God, it's a mess. I enabled this woman to, start building, additional rooms for people to come work and say, sort of thing, and a giant barn to sell food and it's kind of ruined my aesthetics of this beautiful house sitting in this prairie. And, now it's like, it looks like a parking lot. But, I go and I talk to her and I love the project through her eyes. So, yeah. This summer we're going out to clean the yard a little bit and get rid of some of the parked cars. I mean, both literal and building wise.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about. So you do all this through architecture. I mean, literally through very specific building mostly. But often enough, you talk to people, NGO groups or planners or alternative planning thinkers, barefoot kind of people. And the question becomes, if it's all about community empowerment, what is the best agency
Mm.
or best site for empowerment? Is it planning? Is it sort of political activism? Is it and law, environmental law, or is it architecture? I mean, what do you think about all that? I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that architecture is somehow privileged.
Oh, we are.
We are, of course, but of course, all of it matters. But where do you think is the site or the root or the main stem of public interest work?
I think it's a really good question, Vikram.
Mhm.
I, yeah, I don't. You're probably different in a sense, but when I went back to college before and I trained before going to Barcelona, I fantasized at points because of the things that American liberal education gets you. Becoming a lawyer and becoming an environmentalist and becoming a scientist. I landed on one out of pragmatics,
Right.
science. But I fancied myself doing all these things because I saw them as empowering. And I recognize now that doing my work, I need them all. And in a way, it would have been great to have been trained in all these things. But I think that, because of the process of co-creation, and because we don't just do the building, but we actually meet with the community and figure out what their assets are and where, some of them will be financial assets, some will be human assets, people's capacity to build in brick, or people, they have access to stone, and that we can get access to. So there's some material assets, there's some human assets, there's all these things. We do what we call asset-based development. We figure out what's there, what people want, what capacities do people have? Is there a lawyer here? Is there somebody who can help us with the plan, the regulations, et cetera? We put all that together and we create the possibilities. So
Right.
in a way, if I described all the different professions and knowledges and if, capacities that went to put a building together, it'd be bewildering. I mean, we've done that. We've mapped the assets and capacities that have done a project, and it looks like chaos theory. It's insane, everything. And sometimes in some projects like the American Indian Housing, we've become aware of that and have done everything from designing the building, getting to know the community, and figuring out what their assets and do asset-based development, which takes us into the realm of social sciences and what today is called green economics and planning. But we've also, kind of gone back and rewrote the regulations and wrote
Right.
the code.
Mhm.
We took on writing the code for community-built straw bale housing, or just straw bale housing generally. And sometimes we've bordered on getting grants to figure out how the building technology works, and so that we can actually then use that knowledge to promote a code to enable people to build in something that they would do naturally. But now the modern world is requiring them to get a permit to do, and they've done for thousands of years. So when you ask me which is the most important, oh my God, can I name 30?
Yeah, no, I understand. No, that totally makes sense to me that, making a building, naturally, if done well,
draws in this entire diversity of disciplines and communities and social processes and social infrastructure and everything into it. And so it
Yeah.
impacts and is impacted by everything. But I think the question
Right.
that I'm trying to drive at a little bit is, the question of scale.
Right.
Because they always say architecture can only work at a certain scale, which is a more small scale compared to
Right.
uh, let's say from my background, politically speaking, the impact of Nehru on India as a political agent, major political agent or community leader, or sort of can have devastating impact on communities, whereas architecture is always
Right.
small
Right. Right.
scale. So how do you parse that?
Well, I think that it's so. Yeah. So I misunderstood your direction, but
No, no.
I think it's still I think it's a fundamental question, and I think that uh, I think what we in the end I'm an educator,
Right.
so it's really about collaborating with students and other colleagues and other extra disciplines to create this building with the idea that the students learn from this and the other colleagues from other disciplines and as well as architects learn from this, and we all come out empowered and knowledgeable about this public interest process, right?
Yeah.
Because I think the part that was missing, the big middle that was missing in architecture to me was the kind of background, the behind the stage. What does it take to do this? If you're and that's always been missing, with the backstory, because we as architects, we kind of tend to rewrite it, to ennoble us. But
Yeah.
also in public interest design, that backstory is the central story, because at the end of it, if all these people are empowered, they become, they become more. The community gains from this, and it becomes more, kind of great. It builds capacity, builds its assets, and is able to then do other things. So
Right.
I always tell my students, we're not going to do a building. We're going to build a system,
Right.
and we're going to
Right.
build a system for the delivery of a home,
Yeah.
or we're going to deliver the system for the delivery of a school.
Right.
And when it works well, and it doesn't always work, but we've been lucky that most of the time it has, that system then continues and grows after we leave. So we started this American Indian housing. Lots of buildings have been produced as a process of us enabling, teaching people how to build their own home, helping to restructure the housing agencies, figuring out how they would be financed. And now my colleague Dave is now figuring out how he can get somebody like Solar Home, the big national solar installation company, the other side of Tesla,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to teach to put solar panels on the Native homes, and teach and create job capacity of Native Americans to do that, which is a great job that they can then, which empowers them and changes their condition. So the same thing happened to us in the schools in Mexico. That was like one of the most beautiful examples. When we were building schools, schools were so fundamental. We started out building schools in the squatter communities of Mexico because to, for people to kind of, you're in a squatter community, you don't have tenancy. It was hard for people to claim political rights. So schools became, if you have a school and the government's sending teachers there, then they can't ignore you. You are officially a voting population.
Right.
So then we built these schools, and then the women came back to us and said, "This has been transformative. Well, we need clinics now." So,
Right. Right.
and so we went to
So
clinics, and
one
from
thing leads to the other.
the clinics went to. He said, "Yeah, because health, the health of these kids and these mothers is collapsing." So, kind of growing knowledge both on their part and ours, and from that it led to libraries. We've never had a children's library. We built the first children's library. Millions of children, no children's library. It's kind of like, it's a kind of a architecture can be part of the process of discovery. It can become a mechanism for discovery, because as you start building the fabric that was never missing, that was never there, that you were denied because of disinvestment, or because political processes that work from top to bottom and often miss the needs of the people at the bottom. As you look at this, you just people become to where they can of their needs. We all become aware of our needs, and
Yeah,
also
yeah.
become aware of the capacities we have to change that. And
So,
that to
yeah,
me is the final product of public design, is that awareness and
right.
capacity building.
So what I hear in you is this sort of articulation of this bottom-up
Mm,
ideology, bottom-up philosophy.
right,
This idea that which is comes with an embedded deep suspicion of top-down processes.
right,
So the argument that it's not a question of scale, of course, it would be fantastic if there was a divine God who would sort of design everything top down in an equitable manner. But history establishes for us that all masterful and highly uh, top-down planned processes remain hegemonic and invested in limited interests, and so the bottom-up processes are are the only way to provide real meaningful change, which is in the, as you say, public interest.
right.
But beyond that, also, it seems to me, and now again, feel free to disagree with me, but that what I hear you say is that life is not a master planned blueprint, but life is a kind of a small scale kind of integration of things where everything, all that happens is small scale, and then it all connects together and makes a larger weave, but that the ultimate outline of that larger weave, if it is to be meaningful, cannot really be known from the outside. It's a
Right,
sort of inside out process of which there is no real outside.
right, right. I think that's beautiful. I mean, you said it so nicely. I don't think I have anything to add except that I think it's. I think it's. It really. I mean, can't ever truly be seen from the outside, and that's why this role that Teddy Cruz, my lovely friend, and not the bad Teddy Cruz, the good Teddy Cruz who lived in San Diego and Guatemala, and architect exile as well.
Right.
He says the best role for the architect is that of curator, of curating, in this kind of, if you take on this public interest design. In other words, being able to weave the different things together and to be able to step back and realize that you're trying to achieve this, but how do you get it done and how do you get the greatest outcome?
But is curator a good term for that? I mean, curator has this idea, I think, of museum curators as people
I
who sort of.
know well, unfortunately the museum world has ruined it, but the idea of curating is still, I think, from his perspective, and I from what I understand of his perspective, well, I mean, from all the discussions we've had, is an appreciation of what is of value, and then communicating that value to others, and then being able to essentially, curating also has a temporal dimension. I mean, we don't think of it because we go to a museum and everything's set, but a temporal dimension is that to put it together, there are people that have to put together in conversations, and there are things you're searching. You may be searching for a painting, but there's an entire backstory which has to be part of it, but also the relations that are associated and
Right,
everything
right.
else. And I think that that's important. But for us, it's the temporal dimension and the idea of exposing and empowering people through the weaving of that story that makes the work.
I get this idea of the backstory.
Yeah.
But what is your thinking about this kind of, let's say, Ruskinian position, that really building something, really with your
Yeah,
hands and
yeah,
with the
yeah.
community, actually making something is a particularly empowering act? I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Does that factor into your work?
Well, okay, so I love Ruskin, but he's a wacko. Um, once you get deeply reading him, you realize, my God, it's kind of a cautionary tale,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you want to be Ruskin, but not follow his trajectory. But
Outline. What do you mean by that?
well, just it can be self-absorbing, the journey. I mean, I think that the way we see, I think I agree with him in the sense that, it is the act of making is both not only validating of the idea, and it's really a discovery of what is significant in the idea. Because in making, you move into the material world, you move into the lived-in world, which you share with so many other voices and people and things like that. And so in doing that, you it challenges you to figure out what can be communicated, and not just in a drawing. You're just communicating with yourself, and you learn how to convey that with others by making it a kind of artistic or expressive enough. But in building, then you move into the world of economics and planning and permits and figuring out what material is of value to people. And there's nothing like the moment you grab the brick and you look at it, and I mean, in the Kanye West, and
Ask it
realize
what it
there's,
wants to be.
yeah, one wants to be. And every village in Mexico has a brick that has a different quality, and that drives you to, enamors you to do something that ennobles that brick, which has been made by hand, and people have made buildings and they have adjusted, and then there's knowledge embedded in how they've interpreted that brick they make and everything. So I think there's that world that you want the architecture students to understand, and all of us to understand, because it's a way of respecting and becoming part of the culture you're going to be serving and being part of, and curating. But then at the same time, in the act of going in there, I think you become aware of architecture is a system, and it's one of the largest investments, most wired in investment. If you to draw the roots that it takes to build, and the tapping of resources, people making the brick, the guy who makes the lime, the concrete, and where the gravel comes in, and you begin to wire it in. You just get a map of the entire society. So every act of building is basically a map of the society you're working in. It's everybody's inextricably involved in it, and that's one of the beauties and challenges of building, is that it involves an economy of scale, no matter where you're, which we often avoid thinking about when we are architects, and that's part of the reason we're in this kind of deep shit about,
Yeah.
and say that about ecology, right? Because we forget how deeply embedded in all this. We're not aware of, where it was mined and what impact it had on the nature there and all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, of the people's lives they're involved in making it and stuff like that. So when I take them and work in a squatter community and people are making the material, or in a village and people are doing this and extracting these things, and you met the guy who made the brick and all that, then it's a way for me, in a kind of laboratory, or a kind of a situation in which I can control and expose the students in a deep way. I can
Yeah.
make them aware of the depth of this, and there's nothing, of course, in the Ruskinian sense, once you see the reflection of those flecks of the brick, and you see how it reflects, it just changes the way you're going to conceive the building. But it also makes you aware that building is both empowered by and limited by the fact that it involves so many economies of scale in its production, and that's what creates poverty down below,
Right.
and creates richness above. But I'm going to just kind of draw. So there's that part, the scale, the fact that it's this huge enterprise, but there's also something that's fundamental in the relations that it takes to create a building. When you're creating a building, yes, there are people who build a building themselves, but most buildings are these sites of learning, and people are exchanging knowledge and conversations and things like that, and they're temporal, and they
Right.
take time, and you have to, and all of a sudden they begin to, any good building, like in some of the things would take us a year to build a school, coming back and forth, and your knowledge grows, and because it takes temporal dimension, it gets built into your memory. It's not just one snapshot, but it's wired into a whole range of experiences, and it's
Right.
wired into a whole range of experiences in your life, and in the whole bunch of experiences in the lives of the community.
So what I hear is, when you ask the brick what it wants to be,
Uh-huh.
the brick says, well, let's talk to the financiers, let's talk to the lawyers, let's talk to the community, let's talk to the material, let's talk to the climate, and
Yeah,
all
yeah, yeah,
these
yeah, yeah, yeah.
all these voices are heard um, through the brick, and
Right.
not a sort of fetishized view of the brick. But But have you ever, I mean, one is to have a sort of a Ruskinian phenomenological
Right.
Kanyan view of the brick. But have you, I mean, my sense of, as an outsider of, the Native American communities and, the pre Columbian communities,
Mhm.
and even the, old South Asian communities, had a different epistemological reading of material,
Right.
right? They did
Right.
not think that brick is just inert dead matter, and
No. No.
really, it's
Yeah.
it's. I mean, they have you. What have you learned? What have sort of? Is there any way to articulate what the brick wants to be in a non-Kanyan way that is learnt from your work with the various communities?
Well, yeah, I don't, I wanted to, yeah, I don't want to, I want to make sure to be cautious not to make it into a kind of, what I'm saying, into a kind of romanticization of it. It's not
Yeah,
like, part of what we do on site is uh, often to, and this has become central to us, is to empower people to do it themselves. So there are often we're dealing with people who are not artisan, who have lost the connection, and or women who have never given the opportunity to learn how to do this. So
right.
they gain that capacity, and or they gain the capacity to start their own little industry in making bricks, or or running a job site. All the different range of activities they take. So I think that I want to make sure that it doesn't go back to that romanticization. But I think that I used to kind of have meta theories about how this was working, but I've been in the world in a way that it's taught me many different things. I early on I worked with this architect Carlos Mijares, was one of the great architects of Mexico, and he was the master of brick. He was known as the great brick architect, and he was a modernist by training, but this beautiful brick vaulting, and kind of ennobled the whole thing
Right.
with an incredible body of work. But I remember going to a site, and there was a stone church for change making, and the guy, we came to this artisan who was totally embedded in this beautiful community in Michoacan in Mexico. And the guy said, and we asked, well, where's the guy? He said, oh, he's back home. So we went to visit this old guy, literally 80-year-old guy who's still building this building because he loved it. And he said, so why ain't you out there? He said, well, I'm not there because, that I went to the mountain today and the mountain said it was tired of me digging it. And, so on one end, I have,
Yes. Yes.
and this is why, like India, I think Mexico yes, I fell in love because of the political discourse in Spain,
Yeah.
but I think I became an architect in Mexico because I was enabled to see this kind of how deeply rich, this view, it was going to be a rich life being an architect, culturally and experientially, such a rich experience being an architect, and I learned that in Mexico through contact with the artisans and, big ideas, small ideas, experiences on site. So I think it's, there is this kind of like, kind of knowledge, transfer of knowledge and ideas and things like that that are central to this, and it's this weaving of small and big lives, that's kind of central to, and how do, and I think part of the reason I think curating is a good word is because how do I curate it in a way that I can get the students to understand that there's this kind of weaving of, to listen to the small voices as well as the guy who comes in as an engineer and tells us that the building's not going to stand up, but to also hear Manolita who
Right.
tells
Right.
us the mountain is too tired to be dug today, and understand why that is there, right?
That's a great image, Sergio. I mean, I'm on this idea of the old man telling you that the mountain's too tired. I want to thank you for taking the time out, having this conversation with us on Architecture Talk.
It's
Thank you
been a
very much,
pleasure,
Sergio.
Vikram. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is Vikram Prakash, your host, And our producer is the one and only Sammy Prouty, a graduate student of architecture here at the University of Washington in Seattle. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation, and if you did, please do take a moment to subscribe and to rate us on iTunes. See you next time. Take care. Goodbye.